Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as you know, most every January, hardworking families across this country gather together at a kitchen table and they work on a budget. Then once a month, they try to balance their checkbook. Making a budget, balancing a checkbook, Congress seems to be incapable of doing either of these. And that's why today, this country faces a national debt of over $36 trillion. $36 trillion. I believe that debt is the greatest threat we have to our long-term national security and to the future of America in so many ways. So first we need to look, how did we get here? How did we get to $36 trillion of national debt? And I think many of us feel it's been driven by federal waste, by fraud, and gross mismanagement. Now, last year's federal deficit, I want you to think about this. We're talking about the deficit now. We have a national debt, $36 trillion, and we have a deficit each year. So this last fiscal year, the federal government took in $5 trillion, but we spent $7 trillion. Let me say it again. We took in $5 trillion, but we managed to spend $7 trillion. That's pretty simple math for a deficit of some $2 trillion. Now, this last year, we eclipsed a new benchmark. The federal government spent more on interest alone payments on the debt than it did on funding the national defense or Medicare. Let me say that again. We spent more on making an interest payment than we did on national defense or Medicare. And no matter what your priorities are, whether it's schools, roads, and bridges, or maybe you think we need more military, when we're spending $1 trillion a year as a nation on interest, lots of things are going to go unaccomplished. Now, the American people have clearly spoken. 77 million people elected Donald J. Trump to be the president. And with them, his priorities that we deal with the bureaucratic inefficiencies, overregulation, and a government that prioritizes beltway politics over the heartland, all without any transparency or accountability. So what am I talking about? The Pentagon can account for $824 billion. Improper federal payments in 2023 were $236 billion. Pandemic relief loss to fraud and abuse was $200 billion. There's one, that right there together, just those three items alone, $1.2 trillion of waste, fraud, and mismanagement. Now, we take a peek again at 2023, the Biden-Harris administration's open border policies. Think about the cost of taking on these 10 million, maybe more, illegal immigrants, at least $150 billion. Our Department of Education spent over $1 billion promoting DEI initiatives in schools. Let me say it again, $1 billion promoting DEI initiatives in schools, but our kids can't read and write and do math. Meanwhile, the U.S. government adds $6 billion of debt daily. So we're $6 billion. By the time you wake up in the morning, you go to bed, you wake up the next day, we've added another $6 billion of debt. And the total debt now, as I said earlier, over $36 trillion. And again, making an interest payment of $1 trillion each year. So I think this is where Doge comes in. What can Doge do here? I'm proud to be one of the founding members, appreciate Senator Ernst's leadership on this, and I'm committed to addressing this crisis and reform the federal government to operate with the efficiency and accountability that Americans deserve. Now, to address the spending crisis, we need a plan, we need accountability. We have some simple reforms that we can make on day one that slash the spending and disrupt the accounted for blank check spending that we're seeing out of this federal government. So here's just a few examples, and I've been sharing with these people that are coming into this new administration. If this was a business, the first thing I would do, and I saw that we had spent $2 trillion more than we took in, the first thing I would do is I would freeze federal employees. I would not hire any more federal employees. Next, I would require all federal employees to return to their office to work. Maybe only 1 out of 10, maybe 2 out of 10 federal employees in D.C. are actually back in office working. Next, I would decentralize the federal government. There's many functions of the federal government that could be formed better, less costly, if we would move them out of this environment. And then next, I would implement term limits for political appointees as well as long-term employees as well. I think there's opportunities for agency consolidation. We can modernize the IT system. We're spending 80% of $100 billion annually on an outdated IT system here at the federal government. The opportunities that we would save financially with regulatory reform are infinite. We could roll back energy mandates, EPA limits, methane emission rules. We could expand federal land leasing for oil and gas production. Next, I would talk about cutting subsidy waste, getting rid of some of the tax credits. So for instance, taxpayer-funded electric vehicle subsidies could be done away with. Why in the world are we giving tax credits to foreign entities? So we have foreign countries, foreign entities that are benefiting from some of these tax credits as well. Our grant oversight is just pitiful. Spending money, the NGO research grants, we don't know who's spending it and where it's going. And then we're funding billions of dollars on gain-of-function research, teaching China how to develop weapons against Americans. The biodefense program for NIAID is spending over $2 billion annually, again, to help communist China develop bioweapons against Americans. We need more research accountability. There's opportunities for education reform. And then in the taxation and IRS reform, we could rescind the $80 billion for IRS funding under the IRA Act as well. And certainly simplifying tax laws would be a great opportunities as well. And that's just a few. That is just a handful of the ideas that we have passed on to Doge and to President Trump's team, and we look forward to working with them. I think it's enough said. Enough is enough. It's time for federal agencies and unelected bureaucrats to remember that we, the people, sign their checks, and that Doge is absolutely committed to restoring accountability and putting the federal government back on the path to serving the American people. These solutions will give Beltway bureaucrats the fits. It'll give them heartburn, but these reforms will finally put the federal government on notice and on a path to start working like a business. And I'll close with this. Look, Doge can help us identify and prioritize waste. So Doge is going to help us identify and prioritize the waste, the fraud, the mismanagement. But it's up to Congress to put their gloves on, to roll up their sleeves, and get the work done. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.